The Tesla Model 3 received 325,000 pre-orders in the first week of sales alone, which is mighty impressive not just for an electric car, but for any car. And in that same vein, we're here today to find out whether the Tesla Model 3 performance measures up to not just other electric vehicles, because we're talking about cars, not gadgets and gizmos today. See whether it actually squares up with its combustion equivalents. Hello and welcome to the highly anticipated Tesla Model 3. Now first, a quick bit of background in case you've been living under a rock for the past few years. Tesla came on the scene as a brand new manufacturer pioneered by the real life Tony Stark, Elon Musk, to create electric cars for the masses. First came the Model S that really broke ground with range and how arguably it altered the way that electric cars were perceived. It was no longer an econo box with limited range. You could really drive distances and enjoy the luxuries that the Model S had to offer. Then came the Model X that refined it and gave us a new SUV, very sought after architecture these days, and sort of refined the formula. Now the reason the Tesla Model 3 is so important is because it brings a lot of that class-leading electric car technology and brings it in at a much more affordable price. The Model 3 actually starts at under £40,000 in its most basic trim. So it really does have the potential to shake up the market here because it competes directly on price with the best of BMW, Mercedes and Audi. Its riverbed pebble shape might not be the most eye-catching, particularly when a lot of the Germans are going for angular, aggressive designs. But a bit like the original iPod, it looks very futuristic, clean and modern. It's also an aerodynamically sympathetic shape to reduce its coefficient of drag and boost efficiency. Now, as I alluded to in the intro, this car really has to acquit itself as a car, not a gadget or gizmo. Being an electric car is no longer a sympathy card. The Model 3 has to stand on its own 2 feet and win group tests and comparisons as a car, not simply an electric car. So that's where my base level is here. I'm thinking about what it's competing with and how it squares up to them. So this being the performance version of the Model 3, it is a dual motor, meaning it has all-wheel drive, and a 335 kilowatt hour output, or about 449 brake horsepower in old money. So it certainly squares up to the very sharp end of the spear of things like performance BMWs and Mercedes in that respect. In terms of numbers, 0 to 62 miles per hour in a very impressive 3.2 seconds and a top speed of 162 miles per hour. But in practice, it actually feels so much faster. The instantaneous torque that you get from an electric car means that there's no delay, there's no build for the engine and peak torque and peak power. It is there like a light switch, and that's been amusing in just about every electric car from BMW i3 right up to the crazy P100D Model S's in ludicrous mode, etc, etc. That's retained here, so there's still a good shock and awe factor for passengers. But yeah, it's really impressive whenever you slingshot yourself out of a corner with no delay, utter urgency, and just the way that it covers open ground so rapidly is very, very impressive. And I'm not just talking about in a straight line, because we've got the battery pack so low in the car, the centre of gravity's low, there's less body roll than what you'd expect, and it just means there's less inertia, it feels planted, it feels quite glued to the road. Now, when you start going through a sequence of bends, the nice well-weighted steering is great, very accurate, you can sort of pick off apexes quite nicely. There's not too much in the way of feedback coming back to the driver. I wouldn't call it a driver's car. It's not that sort of machine, I don't think. It's not about so much interacting with the car, but in terms of point and shoot, I mean, it is incredibly impressive. And the grip levels are very high as well, so you can have a lot of faith that where you want the car to go is exactly where it is going to go. Well, the Model 3 doesn't defy physics. It's quite a heavy car, so you can feel some of that weight shifting around and sort of under braking and turning in overly aggressively. You will find that understeer. But on balance, I think the chassis overall is impressive. There's fun to be had in this car, that's for sure. In addition to the performance model's outright speed over its siblings, it gains things like a carbon rear spoiler, uprated brakes, sports suspension, these rather snazzy alloy wheels. You'll also find within the 15-inch touchscreen infotainment system a track mode, which just changes the parameters as you'd expect: sharper steering, greater throttle responses, tightens everything up. But you know what, after the first few weeks of ownership, the novelty of how quick this car is probably wears off, and you get down to the day-to-day of living with it, which means you can turn it all back to its most comfortable settings, and like all electric cars, enjoy that really zen-like feel of cruising along with no noise whatsoever. You sort of seemingly float along the road, and whilst the ride actually, with the sport suspension and these alloy wheels, can be a bit firm over individual bumps, it's reasonably fluid once you get up to speed. Also, cruising along, you get to enjoy a bit more of the interior. It's very airy in here thanks to this front to back glass pano roof. The lack of a traditional centre console replaced by a large 15-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which is really intuitive. It behaves more like a big iPad than anything. The software is great in it. The graphics are fantastic. It's really easy to use. Everything comes through this, even the speedo. So you get this nice, airy, unobstructed view ahead. Yeah, it's great. I really like how ergonomic the cabin feels. It doesn't feel hemmed in or claustrophobic at all. I will say the material qualities aren't quite up there with some of its competitors. The likes of BMW, Mercedes and Audi in particular will shame this interior. It's much better than what previous Teslas have been, but I have to say there are still some scratchy plastics in what can ultimately be quite an expensive car, particularly this performance model, which comes in at about £53,000. But for that cash, you do get the interior lined in this vegan leather. You get seating for 3 in the back. There's a reasonable amount of space back there. Between the front trunk and ergonomically opening boot, you'll find 425 litres of cargo space, making it a perfectly acceptable car to use on the day-to-day. Charging times obviously vary based upon so many different things: temperature and current status of the battery and the starting percentage, etc, etc. But what Tesla will say is that it will charge 170 miles in about 30 minutes from a Tesla supercharger. However, unlike its bigger siblings, it doesn't receive free supercharging, meaning that it will cost you about 24p per kilowatt hour of charging, still considerably cheaper than the fuel you might use in, say, a BMW M3. I have to say, overall, my first impressions of the Tesla Model 3 leave me very, very impressed indeed. I mean, not only is this an electric car with impressive technology, intuitive interfaces, good to drive, at a very sensible price point, but it's probably one of the first electric cars that stares its combustion rivals dead in the eyes and says, yeah, go on then, I will take your crown. And whilst I think traditional BMW, Mercedes and Audi owners will criticise this car for things like material quality, and there's still a few panel gaps that maybe need some attention on this car, overall, as a package, it's incredibly impressive. And I really do think if you're somebody who's not really strayed from the line of tradition in the past 10 years, that this may well be the first electric car that you seriously consider buying. And beyond all of that, you know, impressive engineering and technology that goes into this car, is a machine that you can genuinely use every day. Range anxiety isn't really a thing, and in the case of the Model 3, it's not going to cost you the earth to buy. But this performance model might cost you your license.
Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments below. Please subscribe for all of the latest and greatest cars to hit the road. For breaking news and written reviews, visit www.insidelane.co.uk.